My boyfriend said I'd never make it. Then I found him working for me. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. The glass door slid open with a hiss, and I stepped into the conference room, my heels clicking against the polished floor. My assistant had said the new hire orientation was running behind schedule, so I was here to welcome them myself. I didn't expect much, just the usual mix of nervous smiles and polite handshakes. And then I saw him, at the far end of the table, in a crisp but cheap suit that didn't fit quite right, sat Ethan. My Ethan, or at least, the man who used to be. The man who, 5 years ago, told me I was delusional for thinking I could start my own company. The man who laughed when I said I wanted to build something that mattered. The man who, on the day I walked out on him, smirked and said, "You'll come crawling back when the real world eats you alive." Now he was sitting in my boardroom as my employee. I didn't let my expression change, but my pulse roared in my ears. He looked up and froze. For a second, the mask slipped, and I saw the flicker of recognition and panic. "Welcome," I said evenly, forcing my voice into that calm, controlled tone I'd mastered over the years. "I'm Harper Lane, CEO. Let's get started." A couple of the new hires shifted in their seats, oblivious to the tension slicing the air in two. I took my place at the head of the table, every inch the professional. But inside, the memories came flooding back. Late nights crying in my car after another rejection letter, friends quietly distancing themselves when my business barely scraped by, the endless grind of proving, to myself, to the world, that I could make it without him. And now here he was, looking smaller somehow, older, like life had knocked the arrogance out of him. But I knew better. Arrogance like his didn't die, it waited. I started the orientation, every word deliberate, my gaze skimming over him without lingering. But under the table, my hands curled into fists. I'd spent years building this empire brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. I had no intention of letting him tarnish it. When the meeting ended, the others filed out, except Ethan. He stayed seated, eyes locked on me. "Harper," he said, his voice low. "We need to talk." The moment his voice hit my ears, I was no longer in that sleek conference room. I was back in our tiny apartment 5 years ago, standing in the kitchen with my dreams in my hands, and him tearing them apart. I had just told him I'd quit my job to focus on my startup full-time. My heart was pounding that night, a cocktail of terror and excitement. I thought he'd be proud. Instead, Ethan laughed. Not the warm laugh I'd fallen for, but that sharp, dismissive one he used when he thought I was being cute. "You? Run a company?" He leaned against the counter, sipping his beer like he was delivering a TED Talk on why I'd fail. "Harper, be serious. You're not cut out for that kind of pressure. You can't even keep a plan alive." I remember gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles hurt. "You've never believed in me." "Because I live in the real world," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You'll be back here in a year, maybe less. And when you are, I'll be here. No hard feelings." It was that last part that broke me. Not the words, but the smug certainty in his eyes. Like my failure was already a chapter in his life story, neatly written and signed. We lasted another month after that. Every dinner was an argument, every morning an accusation. When I finally packed my things, he didn't stop me. Didn't even stand up from the couch. Just said, "See you when you've had your little adventure." That night, as I drove away with my car full of mismatched boxes, I made myself a promise. I'd rather starve than crawl back. The years that followed were brutal. I slept on a friend's couch for months. I worked 18-hour days building my business from scraps, taking every odd job I could to fund it. There were moments I thought I would break, when clients backed out, when rent was late, when loneliness sat on my chest like a weight. But every time I wanted to quit, I saw his face in my mind. That smirk, those words. And I pushed harder. Now here he was, in my building, wearing a name badge with my company's logo. I pulled myself back to the present and met his gaze. "You're right, Ethan," I said, my voice calm. "We do need to talk. But not here." He smirked, like he thought he had the upper hand again. "Dinner tonight." I smiled faintly. "No, my office. Right now." I walked ahead of him, my heels sharp against the hallway tile, every step a reminder that this was my territory now. Ethan followed, silent, though I could feel his eyes on my back. My assistant, Claire, glanced up from her desk as we passed. I didn't break stride. Once inside my office, I shut the door, hard enough to make the framed diplomas on the wall tremble. I took my seat behind the wide mahogany desk, gesturing for him to sit opposite. He did, sinking into the leather chair like it belonged to him. Some things never change. So, I began, folding my hands. How did you end up here, Ethan? His mouth curved into that same smirk from years ago, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Guess fate's got a sense of humor. I saw the opening, applied, and he shrugged. Here I am. Small world. I kept my expression neutral, though inside, curiosity was clawing at me. What happened to your big finance job? The one you said made you untouchable? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Things shifted. Market downturn. Company restructuring. Right? I said, letting the word hang in the air. And that restructuring landed you here. In an entry-level position. The smirk faltered. It's just temporary. I've got offers. I'm weighing my options. I leaned forward slightly. Then why take this job at all? For a fraction of a second, I saw something in his face, desperation. But it was gone as quickly as it came. Bills don't pay themselves. I sat back, studying him. The man who once promised I'd come crawling back was now sitting on the other side of my desk, avoiding my eyes. I could almost taste the irony. You'll report directly to my operations manager, I said finally, my tone cool. Claire will brief you on your duties. Follow them to the letter. He stood, straightening his cheap suit jacket. Sure thing, boss, he said, and the way he emphasized boss made my skin prickle. As he reached the door, he paused and glanced over his shoulder. Oh, and Harper, congrats. Guess you proved me wrong. The words should have felt like victory. Instead, they sounded like a warning. Because in his eyes, I didn't see defeat. I saw a plan. The moment Ethan left my office, I called Claire in. She closed the door behind her, eyebrows slightly raised. That was tense, she said. I leaned back in my chair, drumming my fingers against the desk. Do me a favor. Discreetly pull his file from HR. I want everything. Resume, references, interview notes. And run a background check. Claire didn't ask why. She'd been with me long enough to know that when I had that edge in my voice, there was a reason. While she worked, I opened my laptop and started searching his name. Ethan Caldwell. LinkedIn still listed him as a senior portfolio analyst at some mid-tier investment firm, though the end date on that job had mysteriously vanished. No updates in the last year. No posts, no photos. Just a stagnant profile. But there were whispers in the finance forums. Anonymous posts about a hotshot analyst who'd been pushed out after a risky deal tanked. No names, but the timeline matched. One thread even hinted at missing client funds. An hour later, Claire returned, a slim folder in her hand. You were right to ask, she said quietly, setting it down. I flipped it open. His resume was padded, full of vague buzzwords and inflated titles. The references? All personal friends. And his listed address was an apartment complex on the edge of town, one that catered to people trying to downsize fast. The interview notes were worse. My operations manager had written, candidate seemed overqualified but insisted on starting at entry level. Said he wanted to learn the ropes. Gave vague answers about employment gap. I closed the file, my gut tightening. People like Ethan didn't take steps down without a reason. And they didn't show up in their ex's company by accident. Claire hesitated at the door. Harper, you think he's here for you? I stared at the folder, feeling that old mix of caution and defiance. No, I said slowly. I think he's here for something. And I'm going to find out what. The next morning, I got my first clue, an email forwarded from IT. Ethan had been caught trying to access files outside his department. The IT report was sitting on my desk by the time I arrived. The subject line alone, unauthorized access attempt, made my stomach knot. I skimmed the details. 2 failed logins to restricted financial reports, both traced to Ethan's workstation. The timestamps were after hours. By mid-morning, I'd called him in. He strolled into my office with that easy arrogance I remembered, hands in pockets like nothing could touch him. Morning, boss, he said, drawing out the word boss until it sounded like a taunt. I slid the report across the desk. Explain this. His eyes flicked to the paper and back to me. No shame. No surprise. Must be a mistake. I was just exploring the system, getting familiar with how things work around here. You were trying to open restricted files, I said evenly. That's not getting familiar. That's a violation. He shrugged, the picture of nonchalance. Guess I clicked the wrong thing. Twice, I said. The smile faltered for half a second. Then he leaned forward, elbows on my desk. You've built something impressive here, Harper. But are you sure you've hired the right people? I mean, there's a lot in those reports, deals, client names. If the wrong hands got hold of them. He let the sentence trail off like bait. I met his gaze, refusing to flinch. If you're implying my company isn't secure, Ethan, you're mistaken. And if you're trying to rattle me, you're wasting your time. He smirked again, but there was a tightness to it now. Just trying to be helpful. I dismissed him with a curt nod, but as the door closed, my thoughts were already racing. Ethan didn't take risks without a reason. He was probing for something. Information, leverage, maybe both. An hour later, Claire appeared in my doorway, her expression grim. You're not going to like this, she said. I ran deeper checks. Ethan's been seen having coffee with Connor Briggs. I froze. Connor was my biggest competitor, and the one man who'd been trying to poach my clients for years. And now my ex was meeting with him. Connor Briggs. Just hearing his name made my teeth clench. He was everything I despised in business, slick, ruthless, and willing to burn bridges if it meant getting ahead. For years, he'd circled my company like a vulture, waiting for a misstep so he could swoop in. And now Ethan was having coffee with him. I motioned for Claire to close the door. Where did you hear this? She slid her phone across my desk. A photo filled the screen, grainy but clear enough. Ethan and Connor sitting in the corner of a busy cafe, leaning in close. Connor's expression was sharp, focused. Ethan's was guarded, almost smug. It's from a friend of mine who works across the street, Claire explained. She knows what Connor looks like. He's in the business pages every other month. She saw them meet yesterday morning. Said they were deep in conversation for over an hour. I leaned back, the pieces falling into place. Ethan shows up out of nowhere, slips into my company under the radar, immediately tries to access sensitive files, and now he's seen with my biggest rival. The anger was cold, not hot, the kind that sharpens your thoughts. He's feeding him something, I said quietly. Claire hesitated. What do you want to do? I looked out the window, watching the city move like nothing had changed, even though my world was shifting under my feet. If Ethan's here to steal, then we'll give him something to steal. Her eyebrows rose. A plant. A plant, I confirmed. Something that looks valuable, but will point straight back to him if it leaks. And we'll make sure Connor bites. A slow smile spread across her face. You've been waiting for a reason to take Briggs down. I didn't deny it. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about sending a message that no one, not an ex with a grudge or a competitor with deep pockets, could touch what I'd built. That afternoon, I had IT prepare a confidential document, the kind of thing a greedy man couldn't resist. And I made sure Ethan's workstation had just enough clearance to find it. Now all I had to do was wait for him to take the bait. 2 days. That's all it took. I'd made the confidential file irresistible, a mock client list with inflated contracts and exclusive project details. It sat in a folder marked Executive Drafts, accessible only if someone went poking where they didn't belong. On the second evening, IT flagged unusual activity from Ethan's account. Same pattern as before. After hours, multiple attempts to open restricted files, and then success. He'd downloaded the planted document. The log showed it was copied to an external drive. I didn't react right away. Instead, I let him think he'd gotten away with it. The next morning, he breezed into the office looking smug, even whistling as he passed my door. By lunchtime, Claire slipped me a text. Connor just reached out. Wants to catch up over coffee. Bingo. I agreed to meet Connor at a cafe halfway between our offices. He showed up in his usual designer suit, that practiced shark's grin plastered on his face. Harper, he said warmly, sliding into the booth across from me. Always a pleasure. We danced through the fake pleasantries until he finally leaned in. Word is, you've got some big accounts in play. I might be willing to make you an offer. I sipped my coffee slowly. Interesting. And where exactly did you hear about these accounts? Connor's grin widened, too confident to see the trap. Let's just say a little bird told me. I tilted my head. That bird wouldn't happen to be named Ethan, would it? The flicker in his eyes was all the confirmation I needed. I leaned back, smiling coldly. Then you might want to check your inbox in about 5 minutes. Right on cue, Claire sent the email I'd drafted the night before, complete with the tracking data, access logs, and a little legal notice about industrial espionage. The kind that could gut a man's reputation. Connor's phone buzzed. His smirk faded as he read. When his eyes lifted to mine, they were no longer smug. They were furious. "You set me up," he hissed. "No," I said, standing to leave. "You set yourself up." But this wasn't over, not yet. Ethan still didn't know the walls were closing in. By the time I got back from my meeting with Connor, Ethan was at his desk, pretending to work. I could see the faint smirk on his face, like a man holding a winning lottery ticket. He had no idea the ticket was counterfeit. "Ethan," I called from my office door. "A word." He followed me in, closing the door behind him. "What's up, boss?" he asked, leaning against the wall like he owned the place. I slid a printed sheet across the desk, IT's access log showing his username, his login times, and the download. "Ring any bells?" He barely glanced at it. "Like I told you before, I was just exploring. Maybe I clicked something I shouldn't have." "Twice," I said, my tone flat. And funny enough, the same mistake ended up in the hands of Connor Briggs within 24 hours. That caught him off guard, but only for a heartbeat. Then he laughed, a short, humorless sound. "So what? Maybe I mentioned something over coffee. This industry's all about networking." I leaned forward, my voice dropping. "Networking? That's what you're calling corporate theft these days?" His smirk tightened. "You can't prove a thing. All you've got is a log showing I opened a file. That's not a crime." I smiled slowly. "You're right. If that's all I had, you might get away with it." I opened a drawer and pulled out a slim folder. Inside were stills from the cafe's security footage, the planted documents embedded tracker report, and an email from Connor, already forwarded to my lawyer, confirming receipt of the data. Ethan's bravado cracked. "You set me up," he said, his voice low. "No," I said, matching his tone. "I protected my company. You just happened to walk straight into the trap." He straightened, jaw clenched. "If you think you can ruin me, Harper, you're in for a surprise. I still have cards to play." "Then play them," I said, standing. "But do it by tomorrow morning. Because at 9 a.m., my legal team files the complaint, and the police get everything." For the first time since he'd walked into my office on that first day, Ethan didn't have a comeback. He just turned and walked out. I didn't know what card he was holding, but the look in his eyes told me it was one he thought could burn me to the ground. The email landed in my inbox at 6:13 a.m. Subject line: "Thought you'd want to see this." No sender name, just a string of random letters. My gut told me before I even opened it. Ethan's card had been played. Inside was a single attachment, a PDF of a contract with my signature at the bottom. The company name on it: Briggs Capital, Connor's firm. The document was dated 3 years ago, back when I was fighting to keep my business afloat. The contract claimed I'd agreed to share select client data in exchange for a silent cash investment. And next to my name was a witness signature: Ethan Caldwell. My pulse spiked. It was a forgery. I'd never signed anything like it, but it was clever. Ethan knew just enough about my struggles back then to make it look real. I forwarded the file to my lawyer, then called Claire into my office. She shut the door, already frowning. "You look like someone lit your desk on fire." I slid the printed PDF toward her. She skimmed it, her jaw tightening. "This is bad, Harper. Even if it's fake, it's the kind of thing that makes people ask questions. And if Connor waves this around, they'll see me as the hypocrite who accused him of doing exactly what I supposedly did." I finished. Claire set the paper down. "Ethan's playing dirty. He wants leverage to force you to back off." I stared at the forged signature. My name, written in a way almost no one could fake unless they'd seen it dozens of times. He must have pulled it from old paperwork when we were together. I wasn't going to crawl away now. If Ethan wants to drag my past into this, we'll drag his out too. Every mistake, every shady deal. We hit back harder. Claire's lips curved into a sharp smile. "I'll start digging. You focus on keeping calm in public. If he thinks you're panicking, he'll press harder." At 8:57 a.m., 3 minutes before I was set to meet with my board, I got a text from an unknown number. "Meet me after work. No lawyers, no witnesses, or the contract goes public." And then, a second later, "You know where?" I knew exactly where he meant. The old rooftop of our first apartment building. A crumbling brick walk-up with a view of the city skyline we used to pretend we'd own one day. Back then, it had been our escape, a place for whispered dreams and stolen kisses. Now it was just a stage for something uglier. The air was heavy as I climbed the last flight of stairs. The door to the roof creaked open, and there he was, leaning against the rusted railing, city lights flickering behind him. "Right on time," Ethan said, his voice casual, but his posture wound-tight. I stepped forward, heels scraping against the concrete. "Cut the theatrics. You wanted me here. Say what you have to say." He pulled a manila envelope from his jacket and held it up. "This is the original contract. The one Connor's dying to get his hands on. You walk away, drop the legal complaint, and it disappears. No one ever sees it." I met his gaze, unflinching. "And if I don't?" His smirk returned, sharper this time. "Then your board sees it, your clients see it, and the media eats it alive. Harper Lane, the fraud who built her empire on stolen deals." I took a step closer, closing the gap between us. "It's fake, Ethan, and you know it. But you also know that in this business, perception is everything." He chuckled low. "Exactly. I don't even need it to be true. I just need it to be loud." For a moment, we stood there, the city humming beneath us, years of history compressed into the space between our eyes. I thought about every night I doubted myself, every insult he'd slipped in under the guise of advice. Then I said, "You've made one mistake." He tilted his head. "And what's that?" "You assumed I'd come here without a plan." From the shadow of the stairwell, Claire stepped out, phone in hand, the red light on her recorder blinking steadily. Ethan froze, his smirk faltering for the first time. Ethan's eyes darted to the blinking recorder in Claire's hand. For a split second, he looked like a trapped animal, poised between fight and flight. "You've been recording this?" His voice cracked with a mix of anger and disbelief. I smiled, slow and deliberate. "Every word. Your threats, your terms, your admission that the contract is fake. It's all there, Ethan." He took a step toward Claire, but she didn't flinch. "One more move," she said coolly, "and I'll upload it to 3 different secure drives and send it straight to the police." His jaw tightened, but I saw the faint tremor in his hands. "You think this saves you? That file is still out there. I can make sure it surfaces in ways you can't trace back to me." "Maybe," I said, leaning casually against the railing. "But here's the thing, Connor won't touch it now. He knows he's been set up once, and he's smart enough not to take another fall. That leaves you holding a worthless piece of paper and a very real legal problem." Ethan's gaze flickered between us, calculating, the same way he used to assess a poker hand when we played for spare change in our old apartment. But now, the stakes were everything. "You're bluffing," he said finally, though the words rang hollow. Claire stepped forward, holding the recorder up like a weapon. "Then call it." For a long moment, the only sounds were the hum of traffic below and the wind rattling the loose chain-link fence around the roof. Then, with a sharp exhale, Ethan dropped the envelope onto the ground between us. "Fine," he spat. "You win." I crouched to pick it up, my fingers brushing the rough paper. "No, Ethan," I said, meeting his glare. "I earned this. You're just learning the difference between power and control." He turned and stalked toward the stairwell, but before disappearing into the shadows, he tossed a final glance over his shoulder. "This isn't over." I watched the door slam shut, the echo hanging in the air like a warning. And deep down, I knew he meant it. The rooftop felt strangely quiet after he left, but I knew better than to mistake silence for peace. Ethan didn't give up. He recalculated. By the next morning, I had my answer. Claire walked into my office before I'd even finished my coffee, a printout in her hand. "You're going to want to see this," she said grimly. It was a screenshot of a social media post from a private industry group. Anonymous, but the language was pure Ethan, just enough insider detail to make it believable, just vague enough to avoid being directly actionable. It hinted that my company had serious ethical questions, and that sources had seen contracts tying me to Briggs Capital. The comments were already heating up. Half the posters dismissed it as gossip, but the other half? They were speculating, asking questions, tagging people I knew. I could almost hear the click of whispers becoming rumors. "He's trying to poison the well," Claire said. "If he can't beat you in here, he'll make the outside world doubt you." I nodded slowly, the tight coil of anger in my chest winding tighter. Then we fight fire with fire. We spent the morning pulling every shred of evidence from the recording, every log from IT, every connection between Ethan and Connor. My lawyer's office became a war room, drafting a cease and desist for the Post, prepping a defamation claim, and outlining a criminal complaint. But I knew paperwork wouldn't be enough. Ethan thrived in shadows. I had to drag him into the light where everyone could see him for what he was. By midday, an idea started to form, risky but clean. A press release, publicly thanking an anonymous whistleblower for helping uncover an attempted data breach inside my company, complete with redacted logs that just happened to match Ethan's activity. No direct accusations, but enough for anyone reading between the lines to connect the dots. Claire caught on instantly. You want to make him defend himself without us even naming him. Exactly, I said. He'll be so busy trying to fight shadows that he won't notice the trap tightening. And as I hit send on the draft to my PR team, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Nice move. Let's see how you handle the next one. The text rattled around in my head all afternoon, but it wasn't until Claire burst into my office, pale and breathless, that I understood what Ethan meant. It's Lily, she said, dropping into the chair across from me. My chest tightened. Lily was my head of marketing, and more than that, one of my closest friends. She'd been with me since the early days, when we were working out of a cramped sublet with borrowed chairs and secondhand laptops. What about her? I asked, already bracing. Claire handed me her phone. On the screen was a thread from a popular industry gossip account. It claimed Lily had been funneling client leads to a competitor for months. The evidence was a series of doctored emails, timestamps, subject lines, and signatures designed to look like hers. I felt the heat rise in my face. Ethan, Claire nodded grimly. He's going after your inner circle now. He knows if he can make you doubt your own people, you'll start crumbling from the inside. I set the phone down and took a long breath, forcing myself to think instead of react. This was the move of a man who knew his time was running out, and that made him dangerous. I want you to pull Lily's full email logs for the last year, I said. Every sent item, every attachment, every login location. We'll prove this is a fake before the end of the day. Claire's eyes narrowed. And Ethan? I leaned back in my chair, the weight of decision settling in. Ethan gets no more warnings. We stopped playing defense. I'm done letting him dictate the terms. By late afternoon, IT had confirmed what I already suspected. Lily's supposed emails were composites, built from snippets of old correspondence and spliced together. The IP address tied to their creation traced back to a public library, 2 blocks from Ethan's apartment. I stared at the printout, a cold satisfaction blooming in my chest. We're going to bury him, I murmured. That night, I drafted a message to my lawyer. Accelerate the timeline. I want everything ready for a public filing tomorrow morning. But just before I hit send, my phone buzzed with a new message from Ethan. If you file tomorrow, Lily's career is over. Your call. I stared at Ethan's message, my thumb hovering over the screen. The threat was classic him. Personal, surgical, aimed to make me flinch. But instead of panic, I felt something colder settle in. He'd just given me the final piece I needed. I called Claire into my office, locking the door behind her. He's trying to make me choose between filing and protecting Lily's reputation, I said, sliding my phone across the desk. But what he doesn't know is that we're going to make this threat public before he can act on it. Claire's eyes lit up. Expose him for blackmail? Exactly, I said. We've got the forged emails, the IP logs, and now a direct message tying him to an attempt to sabotage Lily's career. Once we put this out there, he'll have no leverage, because his leverage becomes the crime. That night, I called in my PR team and lawyer for an emergency strategy session. By morning, a carefully crafted press statement was ready. It thanked an internal whistleblower for exposing a former employee's attempt to plant falsified evidence against our staff. No names, just enough detail to make the industry buzz. Then we attached a screenshot of Ethan's text, with his number partially redacted. The post went live at 9:02 a.m. Within minutes, the comments exploded. People connected the dots faster than I'd expected. By 9:30, someone had pulled up an old photo of Ethan and Connor at an industry event and pasted it alongside the post. The narrative had shifted entirely. Ethan wasn't the exposer. He was the saboteur. I was halfway through my coffee when my phone rang. It was Connor. You just set fire to him, he said, almost sounding impressed. He's done. Good, I replied, my voice even. Because this time, I'm not leaving any ashes for him to crawl out of. But even as I hung up, a part of me stayed on edge. People like Ethan rarely went quietly. And if the fire was burning this hot, I had to be ready for the explosion that might follow. That explosion came 2 hours later, in the form of an unmarked envelope slid under my office door. Inside was a single photo of me, taken last night, from outside my apartment window. The photo was grainy, but there was no mistaking it. It was me, standing by my living room window, backlit by the glow of my desk lamp. My stomach twisted. The angle meant whoever took it had been on the street directly outside my apartment. Watching, Claire was in my office within minutes. She took one look at the photo and swore under her breath. He's escalating. This isn't business anymore, Harper. It's personal harassment. I slipped the photo back into the envelope, my mind already moving past the fear. He wants me rattled. Wants me to second-guess every step until I make a mistake. Then we go to the police. We will. I cut in, but not before I end this on my terms. By noon, my lawyer had the photo, the envelope, and a sworn statement in his hands. While he prepared a restraining order, Claire and I worked with security to pull footage from the building's exterior cameras. The grainy stills were just clear enough to catch Ethan's outline. Hood pulled low, standing across the street, camera in hand. That was all I needed. At 3 p.m., I called an all-hands meeting, inviting the press under the pretense of a company announcement. When the cameras were rolling, I laid it all out, not the personal history, but the facts. An employee caught in a data breach attempt, retaliating with forged evidence, targeting staff, and finally, crossing into personal harassment. I didn't name him directly, but the timeline, the documentation, and the images made the truth impossible to miss. The moment I stepped off the stage, my phone lit up. Unknown number. I answered. His voice was low, almost a whisper. You think you've won? I didn't hesitate. No, Ethan. I know I have. And by tomorrow morning, the police will too. There was a long pause, and then the line went dead. By the next day, he was gone from the city, escorted out in handcuffs. Standing in my office, watching the skyline, I thought back to that night years ago when he told me I'd never make it. He was wrong then. And now? Now he worked for me. If only long enough for me to show him exactly what I was capable of. And the best part? I didn't just survive him. I outplayed him.